In the heart of the Grey Rock Valley, where the peaks pierce the clouds, lived a young eagle named Koda, destined for greatness, but waiting for fate. This valley was home to many, but Koda was different. He was born with the widest wingspan anyone had seen in generations, a true gift of nature. While others practiced their flight patterns, Koda simply sat. He believed his natural talent was enough, and that he only needed the right moment to shine. He was waiting for the legendary magic wind, a gust so powerful it would carry him to the highest summits without him having to flap once. Below him, smaller birds toiled. They practiced every day, falling and rising again, their feathers dusty and their spirits tested by the harsh mountain environment. Koda watched them with a smug smile. Why work so hard when you are born to be a king? He thought their efforts were a waste of time. His wings were magnificent, yet they were soft. They had never felt the resistance of a storm or the burn of a long uphill climb. Hours turned into days, and days into weeks. Koda remained a prisoner of his own expectation, anchored to the ground by his refusal to work. He began to wonder why the magic wind was late. He felt entitled to success, believing that the world owed him a path to the top. The air stayed silent. In this stillness, Koda's talent was nothing more than a decoration, a beautiful potential that remained completely locked and unused. We often mistake talent for a finished product. Koda forgot that a seed, no matter how perfect, needs the struggle of growth to become a tree. Seeking answers, Koda finally decided to visit the oldest inhabitant of the valley, a legendary figure who lived in the depths of the silent cave. He found the old hawk, a master of the skies who had long since retired from the high winds to live in quiet contemplation. The master was blind, but he could feel the vibrations of the air. He knew Koda was coming before the young eagle even landed. Koda arrived with a heavy thud. He began to complain about the lack of wind, asking when his destiny would finally arrive to carry him. The master didn't answer immediately. He listened to the arrogance in Koda's voice, a sound he had heard many times over his long life. The contrast was sharp. Koda had the beauty of a statue, while the master had the scars of a warrior who had survived 1,000 storms. "Why do you wait for the wind?" the master asked. "Geo doesn't create eagles. It is the flapping in the dead air that creates the hero." Koda was puzzled. He thought talent was a ticket to the top. He didn't understand that strength is built, not given by the elements. "Persistence is the only thing that keeps talent from rotting," the master continued. "Without work, your great wings will become a heavy burden." The young eagle felt a chill. He had never considered that his waiting was actually a form of decay, a slow death of his potential. "I have flown in storms that would tear your soft feathers apart," the master whispered. "Not because I was gifted, but because I refused to stop." The truth began to sink in. Koda's wings were large, but they were hollow. They lacked the density of muscle earned through thousands of hours of effort. The lesson was over. The master had given him the map, but Koda would have to be the one to walk the difficult path ahead. He emerged into the light, but the world looked different now. The still air was no longer a reason to wait. It was a challenge to overcome. The peak seemed higher than ever. To reach it, he would have to transform himself from a dreamer into a worker. A long and painful process. He took a deep breath. For the first time in his life, Koda wasn't looking for a breeze. He was looking for his own inner strength. The image of the arrogant prince was fading. In its place, the soul of a student was beginning to take shape. Ready to learn. Every journey begins with a single step, or, in Koda's case, a single agonizing flap against the heavy, unmoving air of the silent valley. The master's words echoed. "The summit is not for those who wait for the wind. It belongs to those who create their own flight." The training began under a merciless sun. There was no breeze to help, only the heavy heat that made every movement feel like a struggle. Koda started to flap. 1, 2, 3. His muscles screamed in protest. He had never used them like this before, and the pain was immediate. Discipline is the price of freedom. Koda was paying that price now, drop by drop, as he forced his wings to move against the stillness. He fell, over and over again. The rocks were hard, and his body was becoming a map of bruises and small, painful scratches. The creatures of the valley watched in silence. They were used to seeing Koda sit like a statue. Seeing him struggle was a new sight. The temptation to quit was overwhelming. It would be so easy to go back to waiting, to pretend that he was still the best, but something had changed inside him. The shame of being a fraud was now greater than the pain of the training he was undergoing. He pushed himself up again. He realized that every failed attempt was not a defeat, but a necessary lesson in how to manage his weight. The sound of his wings began to change. Instead of a soft rustle, they started to produce a deep, rhythmic thud that echoed against the cliffs. He was hovering. Without a single breath of wind, Koda was holding himself in the air through sheer, raw power and unrelenting willpower. His wings were no longer just beautiful. They were becoming tools of war. The muscle fibers were thickening, turning into iron-like cords of strength. He practiced low-altitude flight, weaving through the jagged rocks. This required precision and constant adjustments, further sharpening his reflexes and his focus. Day after day, Koda worked until the stars came out. He found that the silence of the night was the best time for his soul to grow. He was learning the language of the air. He could feel the smallest changes in pressure, even without the wind, through his sensitive primary feathers. His confidence was no longer based on a dream, but on the reality of what his body could now achieve through hard work. He stopped comparing himself to the others. He was now in a race against his own yesterday, striving to be better with every sunrise. He added weight to his flight, carrying stones to build endurance. The pain was his constant companion, but it was a pain he now respected. Persistence was turning the talented boy into a disciplined warrior. The valley that once saw a lazy prince now saw a rising legend. Even when the weather turned, he did not seek shelter. He learned to fly with heavy, wet wings, preparing for the challenges yet to come. His transition was nearly complete. The magic wind he once craved was no longer necessary. He had become his own wind, a force of nature driven by an internal engine. He understood now that talent is just the starting line. Persistence is the actual race, and he was finally running it with everything he had. He was ready. The sky was still quiet, but the atmosphere was heavy with the promise of a coming change, a test of his resolve. Then it happened. Not the magic wind Koda had dreamed of, but a terrifying storm that threatened to tear the valley apart in its fury. The sky exploded. Lightning danced across the peaks, and the wind began to howl with a voice that sounded like 1,000 angry beasts. The other birds hid in the deepest crevices, trembling. This was a storm that killed the weak and punished the unprepared with its absolute power. Koda didn't flinch. He watched the chaos with a calm intensity. This was the moment his months of silent struggle had been leading toward. He dived, not away from the storm, but into it. He met the first blast of wind with a scream of defiance that matched the thunder. The wind tried to crush him, to flip him over and send him crashing into the rocks. But Koda's wings were no longer soft decorations. He used the very force of the storm to his advantage. Every gust was a ladder, and every blast of rain was a test of his endurance. He climbed higher than any eagle had ever dared. He was navigating the chaos with a precision that only comes from practicing in the silence. The fear was there, but it was beneath him. His discipline had built a foundation that even the greatest storm in history could not shake. He was near the limit of his strength, but he refused to stop flapping. One more push, one more surge of power from his iron wings. Then, silence. He broke through the ceiling of the world. Below him was a sea of darkness, but above, the sun shone with eternal brilliance. He was above it all. The storm that terrified others had become his elevator to the heavens, a reward for his months of painful preparation. He landed on the true summit, a place of legend. It wasn't the wind that brought him here. It was the strength he built while waiting. He had conquered his laziness, his arrogance, and the storm itself. He was no longer just an eagle with big wings. He was a master. True talent is a seed, but persistence is the sun and rain that allows it to bloom. Koda had finally become the eagle he was born to be. As the storm passed, the valley returned to its peaceful state. But the eagle who lived there was forever changed by his journey to the top. He returned to the master, not to brag, but to thank him. He understood now that the master's silence was the greatest gift he ever received. They sat in silence, two masters of the sky, one old and scarred, one young and strong, both united by the secret of the wings. Never let your gifts make you lazy. Your potential is a responsibility, not a guarantee. The world is full of talented people who never flew. Don't wait for the wind to change your life. Be the wind. Be the force that pushes through the stillness and conquers the coming storms. Your journey starts now, in the quiet moments of today. Every flap of your wings, no matter how small, is a step toward your own summit. Fly high, not because the wind is with you, but because you have the strength to fly even when the whole world is standing still.